Thank you. Lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Chiara. I've had 3 lives. In academia, law tutor, international law and jurisprudence, how law works, how lawyers think. That was my meat. Second life in the City of London during the Great Recession. That was fun, running businesses, turning a profit no matter what. Third life is an analyst. I am looking at this regulation and trying to make sense of it from a business perspective. And I'd like you to see it as a challenge, the challenge that only the smartest guys in the room can really solve. And I called it rock and roll because the European legislator came up with this and doesn't really know how it's going to be implemented from a technical point of view. They don't really give you the technical details, they just want a better world. So it's rock and roll in the sense that they want it by May 25th, 2018, but then it's up to the businesses and it's up to you guys to find out ways to make it work in practice. So as far as intellectual challenges goes, this is it. This is our century's toughest one. But I'll try and break it down for you so that you really see where the opportunities are and how it might work in practice in what you're doing. If you can only take away 3 things from this talk, 1, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR for short, is not just about Europeans. It's not just for Europeans. It's going to have a global impact. The second thing I want you to take away is that consent or no consent, the GDPR is about ongoing control of an individual over their personal data, no matter where that data is. The third thing is that really is a game changer, rock and roll, because the way we do business with personal data is likely to change pretty damn fast. And I'll try and separate my sort of law tutor brain from my business brain, because the first half, I'll tell you how the law works, and the second half, I'll think like an analyst and a business person and say, given what we've seen, would you not agree that this is what's going to happen? And of course, other analysts in the room, Forrester, might disagree. You might have your own ideas, but I'll try and be quite honest as to what the law says and what the implications are according to me as a business person. You can make your mind up. But I will use some props and some volunteers, so we'll be clowning around a little bit to make it sort of engaging, because it's deceptively simple. This European idea of data protection is deceptively similar to other notions of data security, privacy, and yet is slightly different. So I want to tease out the differences so that you really, really get it and go, yes. Okay, point number 1. In GDPR terms, we're distinguishing rights, privacy rights that the person has, from privacy rights that the data about the person has. And now I'd like to introduce my first volunteer. That's Eve Mahler from ForgeRock. Please, round of applause.
Hi.
Hello, Eve.
Hi.
Thank you for volunteering. Eve is going to be our data subject, the person about whom we're collecting data. Now, Eve, I'd like to think, don't share it yet, just think 3 items of information, personal data, but it doesn't become data, I'm sure you'll agree, until somebody records it. So when it's in your head, it's just in your head, information. Okay.
All right.
I like to think very clearly about your bra size.
Not going to share that one.
Yes. You got another thing coming if you think I'm going to stream this live. Okay?
Got it.
Your second item of information, could you kindly tell me what you considered ordering online but then did not order? Something maybe you hovered over with a mouse but then didn't order? Okay. Now, could I have 2 more volunteers? Could I have personal data number 1 and personal data number 2?
Oh my goodness.
Let's see who is impersonating Eve's bra size. Who will it be? Thank you. That's
These aren't
Eve bra
volunteers, they're
size. A round of
victims.
applause for Eve bra size. Thank you. So could you kindly go next to Eve?
I guess so.
Item information number 2. This is what Eve considered ordering online but decided not to order. Okay.
I owe you guys a beer.
The point I'm making is very simple. Personal data in GDPR terms need not be private, embarrassing, intimate. Okay, bra size, you might think, yeah, that's personal data. But Europeans are quite happy to call the choice that you made of not ordering something. So, what would you call that? Metadata? What would you call it? We're starting to capture that information, aren't we, for profiling people's purchasing habits. So that item of information is also personal data. So don't be fooled, that's personal data. Now, there's another item of information, Eve, I'd like you to share. If I said the only female author of the UMA standard, would that necessarily identify you or not?
It's true I'm the only one. You haven't said, yeah, there's three of us. I'm the only female one. Yes.
Okay, so if I have information of the kind, the only female author of the UMA standard, and you cross-reference that information with information that's out there, you can Google who are the authors of the UMA standard. You find there's only one woman. So that information per se has the potential to identify Eve when cross-referenced with another data set that's out there. So Europeans are quite keen on that idea that what makes data personal is not just direct identification, is the potential to identify when cross-referenced with external data sets. That's a pretty tall order. Just let that sink in. That means that knowing what personal data your organization has means monitoring what you have and also monitoring what's out there that could be cross-referenced to identify, uniquely identify Eve Mahler. I'll let that sink with you. And meantime, can we have item of personal data number 3? A round of applause, please.
Thanks, Jen.
So this is personal information that has the potential to identify. So this is why I'm so keen to emphasize that personal data is more than PII. It's quite common to see marketing literature coming to businesses saying, we'll scan your network and find what PII you have, we'll mask all your PII. Wait a minute, what do you mean? PII and GDPR personal data are not interchangeable. I hope I made that point, and we can move on, right? Are you happy with this? Okay. So now we need a few more props, a few more volunteers. As we said, Eve has information, but then it becomes data when somebody decides what to do with it, decides to capture it, record it. Okay, the organization that makes that decision, the how and the why of data handling, of data capturing, let's capture what she did not order. Let's leave the information only with the potential to identify Eve, but not fully identify. These decisions are made by an organization at board level. Okay, marketing director or IT director, but then somebody makes that decision, and the law presumes that the whole organization has the choice of the how and the why of collecting data. And here we have 3 more volunteers. They represent the data controllers. Please, a round of applause for data controller number 1, data controller number 2, and data controller number 3. Data controller number 1, could you go next to item of data number 1? Thank you, data controller number 2. Item of data number 2. Controller. You can tell who the controllers are because they've got the clipboards, very low tech. Okay, clipboards, data controllers. Now, to make things difficult, they've decided to come up with a term that means something totally different from what you're thinking. If I said processor, what do you think? CPU, right? 80% of you think of a CPU. Well, don't think of a CPU. A processor, in GDPR terms, is the organization that says what the controllers tell them to do. So it's the organization that handles the data on behalf of the data controller. So some organizations are both data controller and data processors. No distinction there, they do everything themselves. Others subcontract. So they decide what to do with Eve's bra size, for example, but then it's processed in India or China, and that's the processor, the organization that stores. Just to give you a clue of how wide the definition of processing is in GDPR terms, according to this regulation, just follow me here for a second. Collecting, recording, organizing, structuring, storing, adapting, altering, retrieving, consulting, using, disclosing by transmission, disseminating, making available, aligning, combining, restricting, erasing, destroying, anonymizing. These are all items or elements of processing. These are all forms of processing. So when you hear that somebody is a data processor, anybody who handles digital data essentially is a processor. So could we have our 3 processors, please? Processor number 1. Thank you so much for volunteering for this pantomime. It's not Christmas, but we'll get there.
Yay, data
next
processors.
to item of data number 1, next to item of data number 2, and next to item of data number 3. Right, okay. Now, could I ask, and I'm doing this for a reason, all the data processors to embrace their data controllers? Do this discreetly, please, but do it in a manner that is quite visual and graphic. Okay, so just step forward a little bit. Okay, so the virtuous embrace of data controllers and data processors. We'll come to that. Now, I said the controller decides the how and the why, and the processor doesn't decide the how and the why, just obeys order, okay? Obeys orders. However, if the processor decides to contribute, decides to, let's do something different with this data, let's do something else. This is a tendency, I think, that we should recognize as using your exhaust data for sort of secondary digital revenue stream, revenue-generating stream. So if you are a processor but decide to do something with the data beyond what you were told to do by the controller, you become a joint controller. You take on all the responsibilities, and they're massive, of the data controllers. So that's important to understand, that if you are a business that's processing data on behalf of somebody else, stick to what the contract says. Okay, now, you're going to save yourself some money if you pay attention here. We're going to explain the principle of extraterritoriality by a bit of role play. We can release the embrace, please, thank you. Okay. Now, Eve, you're an American citizen, no doubt about that.
Yes.
But could you kindly travel to Europe? Let's say this is Europe, yes?
All right, I love going to Europe.
Okay. Now, Eve's personal data, the bra size, for example, let's say that the controller of Eve's bra size was, I don't know, a website in the US? A US website?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, so could you step back and maybe position yourself? That's a US over there. Controller, number 1, US, please. Okay. The processor...
Wait, the controller...
Controller's clipboard. Clipboard, that's fine.
All right.
Clipboard. US, controller's in the US. Processor, let's say the back end of the controller was in, I don't know, India? Yes?
Yes, maybe.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
So, processor number 1, could you please go to Asia, over there? Okay. So, Eve's citizenship is not in question. She's not European. 100% US.
Absolutely.
But she's in Europe. That means that because she is on European soil, her personal data, could we have a show of hand, the bra size, gets the GDPR treatment wherever that data is stored. I think you are now going to India, aren't you? We're assuming that the actual processing of Eve's bra size is happening in India. So this is it. You don't need to be a European for this regulation to hit you. You need to have at least one of these three in Europe. Either the person whose data we're discussing, or we could have a controller. Could controller number 3 please come to Europe? Eve, could you go back to the States, please?
Oh, time to go back to the States.
Thank you. So American
Fun.
Eve goes back to the States, but she buys her bra from, I don't know, no, a French one. Come on, give me a better one.
Something, is that
Valentino, or
something
yes?
French, probably.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
TMI?
That's it. Okay, French retailer, high-end retailer. The controller is in Europe. So Eve's data, despite the fact it's in India, gets the GDPR treatment. Okay? Now, we could have a different setup. Could you kindly go back to where? Now, it's Eve's processor that is in Europe. Eve's buys her bra by a US retailer,
Wait, isn't
controller.
it that processor?
That's the data.
Oh, okay.
That's your bra size, yeah?
Oh, bra size.
I'm talking about, okay. Eve buys her bra from a US retailer with processing operations in Europe. So the data now is in Europe. So, one of three, that's the rule. If either the person or the controller or the processor of the data in question is connected to Europe, is on European soil, the GDPR is triggered. That's why it's called an extraterritorial piece of regulation. And that's why it really matters where you or your clients are doing business. Even one business unit can capture you in this network of obligations. So I'm repeating to let this sink in because it's not easy. The personal data in question gets the GDPR treatment if at least one of these three is in Europe. The person, Eve. The person's controller, the bra website. The processor of Eve's bra data. Okay? If one of these. The only case in which you are free from GDPR obligation is when all of these three, person, controller, and processor, are away from Europe, are outside Europe. But there's a catch. Thank you very much. If you could just take your position, just stay. We've got some more work for you. Now, killer apps. Legislators like killer arts. They like the killer article, the article that nails in one clause exactly what they want. They want to create, if the European regulator, or legislator better, wants to create a virtuous circle whereby everybody needs to verify the other person's compliance, the other business compliance before doing business with them, they need a killer article. And this is, for the lawyers in the room or anybody watching, Article 28. The killer article, it's a double lock. On the one hand, controllers, clipboards up, please. Controllers have an obligation, have an obligation to verify that they're only doing business with processors, please put your hand up, processors, that are GDPR compliant. So, could the controllers stand up? So, in choosing who you do business as a controller, who would you go to? People that demonstrate GDPR compliance or people that aren't quite there yet? You, controller, have an obligation, legal obligation, to only do business with processes that demonstrate GDPR compliance. You'd want to see that they're GDPR compliant. You want to see some evidence. There are no seals or trust marks yet. There will be coming. But the obligation is there already, essentially. It's just not enforceable yet, but it's there. So the three controllers will look around to see which processor is GDPR compliant. Okay, But where's the double lock? Processors, could you do 2 steps forward? Come forward. Assuming a client comes to you and asks you to do business, and you realize that the instructions are not GDPR compliant, well, guess what? That's a double lock. The processor has an obligation to flag up to the controller every time they notice that an instruction infringes the GDPR. Mirroring obligation. Controllers have the obligation to only use processors that are GDPR compliant. Processors have the obligation not to comply if something is in breach of a GDPR. Essentially, the line, I'm only following client's instructions, won't cut it. If you're happy that this is a double lock, and if you're happy also that the killer article, Article 28, ensures that this obligation is passed on from processor to sub-processor, essentially contractor to subcontractor, you have a whole value chain. I hope this is clear enough. This is not just about one company. This is an ecosystem issue because the long tail of your liability goes to the last chain in your subcontractor chain. I need you to do a couple more things, and then we're almost there. You can go back to your seat. You are going to see this soon in contracts, tenders, requests for further particulars is going to crop up in legal instruments because the liability chain is so far that even if you do not have clients that do business in Europe, you don't do business in Europe, your clients, might have clients that do business in Europe. So you'll see it creep up on every corner of the world. Okay, now, what is the GDPR actually saying? What are the GDPR obligations? I think we have some cable somewhere. Data protection principles, you might think that, okay, we know them. It's the usual stuff. It's transparency, fairness, legality, boring. But here's the catch. The cables, wonderful. You might be interested to know. Limitation, purpose limitation. Collect data for a specified purpose only. Purpose limitation. Data minimization. Collect only the data that you need for that specific purpose, no more. Storage limitation. Collect data for a specific amount of time, no longer than what you need it for. Difficult. But this is it. So I'll let that sink in. Purpose limitation, data minimization, and storage limitation. And then security, of course, integrity, confidentiality, accountability. But these are not just generic principles. They translate into very concrete rights that Eve, our data subject, has towards a data. Could the data, put the hand up, the items of data.
We're getting to the good part now. I have rights.
Wherever the data is, wherever the data ended up, US, India, if the GDPR applies, and the rule of 3 that we know, Eve has rights to her data, even if the data is held by the processor or by the controller in a different part of the world. Could processor and controller please hug the data? Could we have a 3-way hug? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. Now, you might think that you have personal data and that's your thing, that's your asset. You've collected it, you stored it, you've systematized it, it's yours, right? No, might be, but Eve has some rights towards it. And you have an obligation to facilitate, according to this rule, to facilitate her exercise of her rights. The very, very concrete rights. She has a right, and you have a mirroring obligation to allow that right to be exercised. Why don't I give you a flavor of these rights? I've focused on a few contentious ones, let's say, okay? Eve has the right to know what data the controller has about her. So Eve has the right to know, for example, that controller number 2 decided to record her not ordering something, yeah? Eve has the right to know that. Okay. She has the right to know, and looking quizzical is a very good mime, thank you, Eve, what is the purpose and the legal basis for collecting her not ordering something? Why? Why are you collecting stuff that I haven't ordered? Why collecting that information? She has the right to know who that data is going to. She has to know the recipients of the data. So if controller number 2 was thinking, this thing that she hasn't quite ordered, I'm going to sell that. I'm going to sell that to, there's a couple of retailers that might want to know that kind of behavior. Well, Eve has the right to know that that is happening. And she has the right to know from the start, from the moment that data about her is collected. She has the right to know what the time frame is for that data to be stored. And she has the right to know whether profiling is taking place or not, from the word go. From the moment data about her is recorded, she needs to know if you're collecting this data to build a mosaic, to build a picture of her, to build a profile. So she has a few rights. You have the data, but she has rights over the data that you have about her. Now, these are rights to know, okay? That's fine. These are rights to keep the person informed, good customer practice, keep the customer informed. There's a bit more. You have, according to the GDPR, she has rights to have action taken on that data and mirroring obligations to do stuff to data according to her instructions. Let me give you a flavor. She has the right to withdraw consent. So she's given, for example, bra, yes. She's given a size bra. She's now withdrawing that consent. I don't want you to process that anymore. Can I have it back, yeah? Withdraw consent. She has the right to erasure. Delete any record of my bra size from your systems. Can't think why she want to do that, but she has the right. Okay, yank it back. That's your data. Right. She has the right to portability. She's dissatisfied with that retailer, and she has the right to take that data to another retailer.
Yeah, come on over. Come over here.
So she has the right to ask controller number 1.
Water's better over here.
The website that sold her the bra the first time. So the right to ask that retailer to transfer her personal data to another retailer.
This works great. I
She
wonder what software they're using.
She has the right to ask them to rectify it. The bra size has changed. Upgrade it, please. That's wrong. Okay. If process number 1 is doing profiling, is building a whole picture of, biometrics, she has the right to object to that. I think we have enough. We have enough. So if you want to figure this out, whatever you do with data, consent or no consent, there's a connection between the data subject and data number 1, please.
Let's take you back, Chris, so that we can have a full set.
Okay. And it's got multiple strands. One strand, of course, is consent, but there's lots of lawyers that keep telling you that consent is not all, that you can get away by not asking consent. Sometimes you can have contract. Data number 2, please. That's it. Tangled data, but anyway. And even if you don't have consent, you still have to declare what your legitimate business interest for having that data is, and you need to declare that up front so that Eve can challenge it. I'm not sure that's your legitimate interest. That's way beyond what's necessary and proportionate. Item of data number 3. So this connection that Eve has with the data never leaves, is never snapped. Whatever happens to the data, wherever in the world the data ends up being stored, processed, aligned, etc. So I think there's an applause here waiting to happen for our volunteers.
Thank you, guys.
I think we need to thank you, and you can now take your places. The law lecture is finished. That was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this silly pantomime. Okay. Law in action. Right. Okay. Time to draw the business conclusions. These are my own. They're in the book. You can draw your own. And I'm keen to hear what Merritt from Forrester has as his own conclusions. But if I were to explain in one sentence, and feel free to quote me on this, I'll defend it. What's happening to personal data? It's going bespoke. I think we're not going to have white label personal data anymore. That thread, that cable between Eve and her data stays. Whatever legal tinkering you try and do, there's at least one thread of that connection that stays. Personal data is always personal data for a specific purpose or business mission, call it whatever you want, for a specific time frame, for a specific controller or recipient. And you always need to know where your data has ended up. It's sort of the dream of perfect data lineage, isn't it? Well, now it's law, at least according to the European Parliament, the European legislator. So in my head, I'm just saying the data markets are changing. If data is going bespoke, what needs to change next? What business models are going to have to change pretty sharp? And I've drawn a few conclusions. I hope you agree. And that's where the rock and roll comes in. It's rock and roll in terms of how you source your data. You need to be careful now. Buying data from data brokers is a hazard. Even if they guarantee that they're GDPR compliant, the liability is on you. The responsibility is on you to verify. If something turns out not to be compliant, you remain liable, no matter what guarantees they've given you. So I think that's rock and roll in the data supply chain there. Call it whatever you want. I think that's going to change pretty fast. A lot of business models for data brokers will change. It's rock and roll in the data pipeline, isn't it? If you think about it, you should really only have data for a specific business mission. In my head, that means changing your whole sort of data pipeline into collecting data on a just-in-case basis to collecting data on a just-in-time basis. I'd like to be proved wrong, but I think that's what's going to happen. A lot of the way we use data needs to change. Can you still make money out of personal data? I think the answer is yes. It's still an asset, but there's conditions attached. There's a lot of strings attached. So the simple explanation is it's still an asset, but it's not a commodity. It's not something that you can freely trade, exchange. It's not fungible. What is personal data to one controller will not be legal, lawful personal data for another controller unless there's a consent trail that you need to prove. So, asset, but not a commodity. It's not swappable. It's rock and roll, let's do profiling. I know that I'm taking life into my own hands here. We're talking about digital identities. In many ways, digital identities are intimately intertwined with what the GDPR calls profiling. So profiling is not impossible per se, but it has a lot of conditions attached. So going back to what Mike Ellis said on the first date, I was thinking to myself, can we still do that? Yes, but it's a final, it's an arrival point, it's not a starting point. You have to get the trust, the permission, you have to let the individual know that you're doing profiling, you have to get them on board, get the consent, give them access, control continuously. So the simple sort of rule to memorize here is just do it with them. Do profiling, but do it with them. Don't do it to them. Don't do it behind their back. Make sure they're happy. And lastly, I think this is just rock and roll in data lineage. I think this is just, Eve has every right to wonder, I wonder what my personal data is doing today. Let me check. So this is a tall order. As I said, we don't know exactly how we're going to achieve all this. And obviously, regulators are giving signals that they're taking this seriously. They're starting to fine companies who rely on data brokers. They're fining both the data broker and the company who relied on data brokers. The fines are symbolic at this moment, but will escalate, of course, once the GDPR becomes enforceable. So the signals are there that a lot needs to change, but business models change. And I'm going to tell you a story which I think is good, is fun. Rock concerts are changing. I've discovered this strange flipped business model for a rock concert, which I think is just phenomenal. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Rocking 1000. Anybody heard about them? Yes, no, show of hands, please. Rocking 1000? No, never heard of them. Okay. A gang of mad people, mad about the Foo Fighters, decided to play a tribute song to the Foo Fighters, Learning to Fly. And they decided to do it in the middle of summer, in the middle of a field. And from the entire country, 1,000 volunteers, their own pocket money, their own expenses, on their own tab, carried their drum kit, their guitars, whatever. They carried their own instruments to this field, rock concert, and played a tribute song to the Foo Fighters as a way of saying, please come and play. You've never played, it was actually Italy. You never played in Italy, come and play in Italy, we love you. So it was a love song. And the video went viral. We're going to have a clip now. But also what happened next, I'm going to spoil this for you. The Foo Fighters went and played for them. But what happened next, they decided that was such a good idea that the year after, they did the same thing, but not just with a Foo Fighters song, they did the same thing for hours on end. So the idea now is that people are crowdfunding the finances to go and play to this magnificent rock and roll model. So rock and roll has flipped its business model. It happens. It's no big deal. And I'd love you to enjoy the clip of the Rocking 1000 playing Learning to Fly by the Foo Fighters. Thank you very much. All I can say is bring your own kit. We don't know how to do this, but we need you guys. Thank you very much.